I'm going to introduce our speaker for tonight. Cynthia MaeWa Sitei is a Kenyan-born documentary photographer who lives in Wales, and her work is greatly influenced by the stories that played an integral role in her upbringing and explores themes of stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. If anybody has questions while Cynthia is speaking, you are free to put them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on the chat and relay the questions to Cynthia, or you can use the raise hand function to kind of create that dialogue. So feel free to do either of those while Cynthia is giving her presentation. All right, turning it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dale. And thank you everyone for joining in today where you're coming from. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to engage with me in a conversation about photography. So as Dale has said, my name is Cynthia and I am from Kenya. Maybe I'll start a little bit about how I came into photography before I get into my presentation. So I've written quite a lot and I'm a little bit nervous and very much aware of my tongue and how I'm speaking. So bear with me, please. My journey with photography began when I started, when I actually saved up to buy a Minolta camera. And this was in 2011. So we moved, my siblings and I moved to this country in 2010. And I saved up and I bought this Minolta and I started just photographing everywhere and everything. And I think probably I used to take pictures before 2011, but so it doesn't seem like it's a coincidence that I ended up doing what I am doing today. So I also have a very loving and caring and supportive mother who is also very much a traditional African woman and who was raised by a professor for a father and a teacher for a mother. So there was no way I was going to do anything that I wanted to do. I had to focus first and then do exactly what I wanted to do later. So that's why I went into psychology first. I studied my BA in psychology for 2 years and then I switched on to criminal psychology. And during this time, I was also taking pictures while I was doing my BA, but I wasn't really focusing on it on a documentary perspective. I was only interested in just what I was seeing in my everyday activities and everyday life. And also as I was taking pictures, I was also teaching myself how to develop. So I used to develop a lot when I was living in Winchester in my students' house toilets, and which I will not lie to you, I still do today in my own house share here in Wales. So it's not something that has grown out of me. I still practice this skill, which I think is special and it's not really easy to learn, but at the same time, it's something that is therapeutic and it's fun and it's exciting. And I get to see the final product from start till end, and I love it. With that said, I also had an interest in human behavior, starting with my own. And so psychology was a good enough degree, to be honest. So as I was studying this, I was, sorry, I keep going around and around in circles and not focusing exactly on what I've written. But yes, so I was interested in human behavior and I started looking a lot at war photographers. And while I was researching more of their work, I eventually started gravitating towards documentary photography. And then, but what I came to realize is that the images that I was seeing of people coming, I was seeing the projects that I was seeing from back home, especially from for Black and brown bodies, they were portrayed in a really negative and not a positive way. So for me, I decided that if I was going to do documentary photography after finishing my BA, it had to be something that I knew that I wanted to learn how not only to see, but also to learn how to represent clearly, and especially represent people from where I come from. So one thing I just wanted to say before I start is that there's no right or wrong way to do to do anything when it comes to doing your own passion. So for me, I believe that you do however you prefer to do it, however it's good for you. So for me personally, as Dale has said, I'm interested in projects that allow me to explore social and environmental issues. And I do this in a more longitudinal way because I prefer long projects than small projects. And especially these projects kind of have to address issues around stigma, stereotypes, and prejudice and discrimination. And which brings me onto my project, which I've been working for almost 4 years now, which is titled, If This Is a Human, a Great Curiosity. I'll just share my screen. I hope everyone can see this. 1 second, actually. I'll put it on full screen. Yeah. So in 2018, as I was traveling, so I started my master's in documentary photography in 2017. And as I was doing my master's in documentary photography, I focused mainly on representing, my thesis was around representing rape, photography, and social violence in Africa. And for this, I focused in my own country, Kenya. So I went back and forth. I traveled a lot back home at the end of 2017, 2018, and 2019 to gather research. And while I was there, I lived with my cousin who's called Felicia Mgoi. You're going to see her in this project.
Cynthia, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah?
We can, I think you put it in full screen, but we can still see the toolbar at the top and along the side.
Okay. I think because someone has just posted something.
Yeah, Andrea said it's not full screen.
Oh, dear me. Sorry. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it. It's just that the toolbar at the top and like the tab, the home and the tools and the tab. Yeah. I don't know if there's another.
Is that better?
It's a little better, yeah. We can still see a little border, but not the entire toolbar.
Oh, I apologize for that. I
That's okay.
hope this is okay, because to me it shows that it's on full screen. I'm not sure if yours is this fine?
Yeah, it's better than it was before. I think it's good to progress.
Okay.
Andreas is saying maybe just press the green button. I'm not sure what green button.
That one?
Oh,
Is
even
that
better. That's better.
Brilliant. Yep. Sorry, I apologize for that.
No problem.
So while I was gathering research for my own personal project, when I was gathering research, I lived with Felicia Mgoi, and Felicia Mgoi is a cousin of mine who was adopted by my auntie. So she's not a cousin by blood, but she's like a sister to me and someone who's very close to my heart. And when I was living with her, Felicia Mgoi is a person with albinism. So when I was living with her, she took me around different places to meet different amazing women and men who had suffered a lot of atrocities in their own lives. And as she was taking me through all these places, I just kept wondering how she lives in the rural areas. So one thing I forgot to mention also, please also remember to stop me if I go completely out of tandem, but I tend to focus my projects in rural areas because I find that in rural areas, especially in Kenya, this is where a lot of ignorance exists. So when I was photographing representing rape, I focused mainly on rural areas, and it's more like shanty town, not shanty towns is not the right word, but yes, like, how do I call this? Oh dear me. I've forgotten the name, but yes, I focused mainly on rural areas. And this is the same thing I'm doing with this current project. So I'm focusing on where I come from in Taita Taveta, because this is where Felicia Mvoi lives. And for me, I wanted to also understand, to check my own ignorance, but also to understand how Felicia lives in the rural areas and how people react to her, and how she navigates around the village. And when I started researching this project in 2018, for me, I was interested in how people first reacted to people with albinism back before and after its classification in medicine. So in this image here is a great curiosity, is a poster of a man called Henry Moss. And Henry Moss was African. He was from an African descent, and he lived in Philadelphia, which is where I think Halide Project is. And he lived in Philadelphia, and he started exhibiting himself publicly because at the age of 38, he started tanning. His skin started sort of like pigmenting. So he started from his arms, and then it gradually went all the way to his legs and all the way to his face until he became completely white. So essentially he had vitiligo, but then it progressed into albinism. And at this time in 1796, he was a freed slave. So he was the first man to fully exhibit himself without being tortured or being treated in a negative way. He exhibited himself, and he was able to make money out of people coming to view him and his body and how he has changed. So I thought this was a great title for my project, because it's something that it's as we'll gradually go along, we'll see that for more than 200 years, as I've written here, philosophers and scientists, they would exhibit bodies of Africans and African Americans with white or gradually whitening skin in taverns and dimes and museums, and in circus shows as well. And this is happening even, it happened a lot even in the 21st century. And this is back in the Enlightenment era. And this term, the white Negro, served to describe individuals born with albinism as well as vitiligo, and which is a disorder that robs the skin of its pigmentation in ever progressing patches. So I found this archival image to be quite interesting for my project, and also the title. I took this A Great Curiosity as my title because I'm looking back into history. I'm looking from the Enlightenment era until now to understand how people, what has changed, and not to just to understand, but what has changed and mainly what has changed. Because to me personally, where I've reached is not much has changed. And another thing I wanted to mention is that in the Old Testament, which later I will explain why I mentioned this, but there's a I'm not sure if it's fact or it's proven, but I read somewhere on research that when the child was born, his skin was whiter than snow and redder than rose. All his hair was white as white snow, curly and magnificent. This is to say that Noah was also a person with albinism. And then for me, I was looking at I was breaking it down into different themes. So a condition of vampires is when people say expeditionists or archaeologists, they will travel different parts of the world and encounter people with unusually white bodies. And in there's an English explorer known as Andrew Battle. He met with the white children from Loango, which today is Congo. And according to his travel accounts, they were known as dondos. This was the term that they would call children with albinism. They'll call them dondos. So you'll come to realize that in different parts of the world, people still use these terms. Like in Kenya and in Tanzania, especially, they call people with albinism 00. And I'll explain later what this means. But yes, so Dondos were known as white children in Loango at the time, which is Congo now. And another explorer, which is Olfert Dapa, he also encountered white children in Congo at the time as well, just to corroborate Battle's account of unusually white people. And he said that have not lively color, but white like skin of a dead corpse, and their eyes as it were fixed on their heads like people that lie a dying. The sight they have is but weak and dim, turning the eye like such a look a squint, but at night they see strongly, especially by moonshine. So this quote I found quite interesting because this is when some explorers, and not just some, but at the time, explorers and scientists and researchers would consider people with albinism to be low at the bottom of the food chain completely. They would consider them part human. They were confused as to whether they were part human or part monstrous. And most of the time they would consider them to be monstrous. And it's these terms, these names and terminologies that they would use, like dondos, like 00 today, and kukalako, as you can see on this other side. It's these terminologies and names that they would call people with albinism that would make them look and sound as if they are evil, and they are either they are not human, they are either animals or something completely different from human.
Cynthia, Frank put in the chat that the Dead Sea Scrolls also mention, or they describe Noah as you had described in that section from the Bible. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I will definitely look that up. Thank you. And for me, so this is Vuria Hills. This is where Felicia Mgoy lives. And Vuria Hill is in Taita Taveta. And as I go along, you'll notice that I'm mainly, first of all, I forgot to also mention that when I met Felicia, I was not interested in taking pictures of Felicia. I was mostly interested in how she, like I said, navigates around in the village areas and how people react to her in the village areas. And soon I came to realize that there was a lot of ignorance with how people reacted to her, but she's very thick-skinned and very strong. Nothing can break her, and no words can make her feel like she's not as amazing as she is. So this Vuria Hill is to represent Felicia herself. And obviously there's images of Felicia, but this is the main image that I use in all of my work when I'm describing if this is a human, a great curiosity, because I feel like it's something that is strong, and it just doesn't need more explanation, to be honest.
I love that idea of the portrait of a person without actually including the person in the image. You're using this image as a portrait of her.
Thank you.
That's great.
I think I will avoid reading too much of the text because, as you'll come to know, I use a lot of text. So I apologize for that. But I do think that within my photography, I integrate a lot of text because it works very well together, because I don't tend to take images that are not in a negative way, but I don't take images that are obvious. So they need a little bit of explanation and text to make it easier to understand. So this is Lionel Weffer, and Lionel Weffer was a Welsh surgeon and privateer who lived with, who actually traveled to the Darien of, the Isthmus of Darien in Central America. And he met with the people who lived there. Some of them had vitiligo and some of them had albinism. And his experiences is that he said that, I'll try and read. So the people, the complexion so singular, he would say they had milk white, lighter than color of any Europeans, and much like that of a white horse. So for him, he tried to describe them as clearly as he could. And then he also says that he observed that they are not a distinct race by themselves, as now and then one is bred by of a copper-colored mother and father, though how they seem to be white, he could not understand. He did not know how to, he just, I leave to judge of, he did not understand. So he stayed with them for quite a long time. And these were the white Indians. And yes, he stayed there for quite some time and trying to understand why they became how they became white and how they look like him, but they're born from black and brown parents. So during the Enlightenment era, there was a lot of people, especially people with albinism, who were being exhibited, and they were being, yes, mainly they were being exhibited in different places. And here we'll see that transition. So as I mentioned before, Lionel Welfer, who was a Welsh surgeon and privateer, when he met with the Telekuna people, the white Indians, he said that the reason as to why the children had albinism was because the mother was either gazing at the moon at night during the time of conception. So there were so many different theories that were coming up, which were not scientifically proven, and they were not fact. They were theories that were either circulated around different tribes, even in Africa, which happen up to today. And I remember when I was discussing this project with my mother, she told me the same thing, that when she was pregnant with me, my siblings, and my brother and my sister, my mom told me that even with her sisters, my grandmother would tell her, when it came to discussing anything to do with albinism or sort of diseases, it would be no. There was no discussion. So when she was pregnant, it would be only wonderful talk, but mainly, especially when it came to albinism, grandparents would tend to not want their children to be associated with that. So those kinds of talks were not had when a mother was pregnant. And I found that to be quite weird and very confusing. And yeah, so this is something, it's something that also I found out actually quite recently, that there was this idea of the mother's imagination being that if a mother imagined something when she was having her child, that there would be an issue with the fetus, and eventually the fetus would come out as the baby would come out as something different. And these were some of the views and some of the ideas that were being circulated around. And I feel like they're still the same views that are still around in rural areas, and people tend to believe in these things because there's a lot of witchcraft as well attached and associated with albinism. And so this image, it's definitely not the moon, it's the sun setting. And it's important here because as my project has gradually it has changed as I've come to realize that before, when I was starting this research, I was mainly interested in how people reacted to people with albinism before and after its classification in medicine in 1776. And now I'm coming to realize slowly that it's not that the main issue, because, sorry, again, I'll keep jumping back and forth. Yes, so when I mentioned about Noah, and I think one of you also thankfully told me about agreed with me on what I said about Noah. When I mentioned about Noah is that you'll come to realize with this project, it reached a pause because once the people who are doing a lot of research started realizing that albinism also affects white people, it did not become interesting anymore. So at this time, privateers and explorers, they would travel different parts of the world, in Africa, in India, to find people who look different from them. And once they realized that, it's not something that is only affecting Black and brown bodies, it's also affecting white bodies, it became that, it became not interesting. And so when I photographed this image. This was I was living in South Korea for a year. And Felicia was telling me that at the moment it's very hot in Kenya. And when it's hot, a lot of people with albinism struggle a lot. And during this time, because they live in villages as well, they have to depend on going to work in farms or going out to work in order to support their families. And when they're outside in the scorching sun, they get black spots, and these black spots become cancerous if they're not treated properly and quickly and immediately. And it becomes that the sun is a silent killer. And when it's a silent killer for them, it kind of means that people with albinism don't tend to live until they're 40 years old. So that's where I've reached with my research at the moment. So this image is to represent, yes, what Lionel Werfer said of the Telekunap tribe, but also is to represent what is happening right now with the sun being, with the rising temperatures and the sun being a silent killer for people with albinism. So I did mention that a lot of people with albinism during the Enlightenment era were being taken from different parts and being exhibited in closed doors. So you'd find that princes and literates would come from different parts of the world to come and see exhibitions of people with albinism in closed doors and examine them in different ways. And the way they would speak about them would be very negative and very evil, to be honest. So Voltaire described unusually white people as a feeble race in small numbers below the Negroes and above the monkeys. And this is something that is just, it's a little bit disturbing to read, but it's important that people know these things, because this is kind of why a lot of people with albinism are still being discriminated against, because the language has not changed that much. It's become better, but it's not changed enough. And this is Felicia Mboy. So here, I'd like to actually read a little bit of this. I'm sure you can all read for yourselves. But so born in the Royal Society of London, founded in 1662, and the Paris Academy, established in 1666, hosted a lot of exhibitions of unusually white people. And the first exhibition of a white Negro took place in France, and Maupetit in 1746 wrote that the boy was a child 4 or 5 years old, a white Negro who had all the traits of a Negro, with very white and pale skin that only enhances his ugliness. He further claimed that he would willingly forget the phenomenon, but he felt compelled to relate the history of a little freak. After judging the white Negro's boy's age and external appearance, Maupetit examined the child's large and misshapen hands that, according to him, resembled more of an animal's paw and the hand of a man than the hand of a man. So Voltaire as well in 1775 described the same boy as a little white animal. It seems Maupetit and Voltaire could not decide whether the white Negro boy was an animal, human, or a blend of both. I don't tend to take a lot of images of people smiling, but it's hard for me to not take a picture of Felicia smiling, because she's always smiling. And I thought this is a good image to show, because it's something that represents something beautiful. And also it says that it's just, people with albinism are just like you and me. Yeah. I'm also looking into archival images, and this is Lionel Weffer when he brought some of the white Indians from the Talakuna tribe to exhibit them here in Wales. So I traveled after I finished my master's in 2017, 2019, I went to South Korea. And while I was researching this project in South Korea, I enjoyed talking to a lot of the people because I taught English, surprise, surprise. I'm from Kenya, but yes. And as I was there, I was talking to them a lot about albinism, just trying to understand if it exists here and if there's people with albinism in South Korea as well. And one woman, I remember, she told me that I don't think she understood what albinism was, but she did say that I wish I had their skin color. It's so white, unlike mine. And then I explained to her what albinism is, and then she was very apologetic. And in another group, one of them actually mentioned that we don't have those people in South Korea. And seeing that she had just embarrassed herself in front of a number of people, she corrected herself and said, "Have you met anyone who has albinism here?" So I did actually. And I was running for my bus. I was going to catch a bus. And across the road, there was a man with albinism. And I remember telling my sister this because I traveled with my sister to South Korea. And I remember we were looking at each other. He was looking at me and I was looking at him. Both of us unaware that probably we're both interested in each other because he's probably as surprised as I am surprised of him, because he's wondering, why is this African woman doing in South Korea? And then I am surprised because I'm not saying this in a negative way, but I have been looking for you. I am doing a research on albinism, and it's just surprising to see you here, because I'm not saying that they don't exist anywhere else other than Africa. It's just albinism affects 1 in 20,000 people in the world, across America, England, but in Asia. But in Africa, it affects 1 in 1,000. So it's very small. Whereas around the world, it's very small. Whereas in Africa, it's big. So for me, it was very surprising, but I remember kicking myself and wondering why I did not stop and talk to him, because it seems like we had a conversation with just by looking at each other. And I feel like also that was also enough in some way. And here I narrate that story actually. But also another thing that I came to realize is why South Korea fascinated me and why it's important for me, because I would like to go back and at least try and photograph this project in a different way there, is because South Koreans have a very interesting relationship with skin, with color, and they tend to prefer white and paler skin. So I had this experience actually because I was in Body Shop trying to buy a face cream. And one of the ladies, she was very excited to see me in the shop. And she came and asked me, welcome, come here, come, I need to show you something. So I was like, I already know what I want because we have a body shop here and I buy my face cream here. But she didn't know this. So she just thought that I was unaware. And anyway, so I said, okay, yes, what do you want to show me? So she went and she took my arm and she said, if you apply this cream, it will make you white. And I remember thinking like, wow, you're very bold, but at the same time, I also remember thinking that you're very lucky you met me, because I'm not someone who was going to jump on your face and tell you, just go over and tell you that's obviously it's something very rude that she said, but at the same time, it's not that it's ignorance, but it's not I would say, what am I trying to say? I think, yes, it's mainly ignorance, but at the same time, it's not like she was rude. It was it's what they don't see a lot of people who are Black there. And so for them, they think that we would also like to turn and become a little bit paler or whiter. So I just told her that I'm okay with my skin. I like the way that it looks. So I thought this was something that is quite interesting with this idea of turning themselves or not, yes, making themselves look a little bit paler. And then they also think that some of them, not all, that albinism is something that is something to aspire to look, because they look paler than white people. So I found this relationship to be a little bit, to be interesting in my project personally. And you'll notice that I use this pink hue because within albinism, people say that some people think that people with albinism have red eyes and they see in a different color. So for me, I was trying to show how they see, but they don't see like this. It's just this idea of how people would assume that this is how they would see because of their eyes look a different color. So yes, I think that's it from me, unless anyone has any questions. I apologize if I haven't spoken very eloquently, but I really thank you for giving me the time and staying long enough to listen to me. I appreciate that.
Cynthia, you were quite eloquent.
I stammered a little bit.
No, I think it was great. I mean, I feel like it's a difficult topic to talk about.
Mm,
So I think you did a great job in that and explaining kind of your motivation and your relationship to the subject
thank you.
overall, and your research too. Like that's an important element of it.
No,
like
sorry. Go
no, I
on.
was going to say just like the connections you're making between like the past and the present, and that question of whether things have changed at all.
Mm. Oh, yes, now that you've reminded me, I forgot to mention 00 means on and off in Swahili. So people with albinism in Tanzanians think that people with albinism don't die. They think that they just disappear because they are offsprings of the devil. So these are the things that have still remained up to today. And there's connections with how it started in the Enlightenment era. The language never just, it sort of like paused, like calling people dondos, calling them, in Kenya, we call them Zungu, which means a white person. So we try to not associate them, but we try to push them completely to the margins and make them feel as if they're completely different from us, but they are just the same as us. And I feel like it's the language that has not changed. And that's why you'd find that in Tanzania, people with albinism are hunted by witchcrafts and witch doctors and for their skin and for their body parts, because they believe that weirdly that their body parts would cure certain diseases like HIV and AIDS and cancer. And yeah, it's ridiculous, but yes, yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's a lot. Does anybody have any questions or comments too for Cynthia? If you want to put them in the chat, or like I said, use the raise hand function. I can let you turn on your mic. You can use your voice instead of your typing fingers.
Yeah,
I do like. I'm sorry. What's the name of the woman who's the center of your project again? What was her name?
Felicia Mgoy.
Felicia. Yeah. I think you were saying that one image of her smiling, you wanted to include that. But I think that other image of her kind of sitting in the corner with her head back, for me, that looks very like joyous. She looks very, I don't know, just really happy in that photo. So,
That's how she always is.
oh.
I tried every time to tell her, be serious, but she's always happy. So it's hard. Yeah. Mm.
Oh, Cassandra has a question. All right, Cassandra, you should be able to turn your mic on and talk.
I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yep.
Okay. I'm in Philadelphia. I'm a person of color and I have an unusual complexion in the big scheme of things. And I experience colorism in a particular way, but the larger question is, are you using your own observations and thoughts to access this larger issue of skin color within the African and African American community? Because you mentioned the Korean woman and her perception. I mean, we have that in our community among people who don't lack pigment, but just in whether you're light skin or dark skin, it has signified a lot of things over time, and also delineated us within our own community. So I'm just wondering, do you see your own project going that way, or can you use your project to help us think about colorism within the African American community in particular?
No, that's a great question. Thank you, Cassandra, for asking it. And yes, in the beginning, I did start looking at colorism, especially because I remember I forgot to mention this thing that I found. There's a woman called Barbara Maria Stanford who said that there's something called this notion of staining through desire. And it served as an explanation as to how Blackness spread through the generations and became fixed in the Enlightenment century. So yes, obviously, I did look at colorism because, as I mentioned before, people with albinism at the time, and I feel like even now sometimes, especially in village and rural areas, they are not considered Black and they're not considered white. So where are they supposed to sit? And opportunities they do not get because of how they look. Visually, you can see it's the first thing you see. And for them, I'm not a person with albinism, so I'm not the right person to answer this question. But as best as I can try is, yes, I did look at colorism, but I tend to focus less on that, and I tend to focus more on the language and how they move around the places where they reside. But it's a great question, and maybe I should gravitate towards it and research more. Yeah.
Thanks, Cassandra. All right, does anybody else have questions to either type out in the chat or do like Cassandra did and use the raise hand function, and then you can turn on your mic? Yeah, I think that was a great question. And there's just there's so many kind of issues like bound up within what you're working on.
Yeah.
It could be like very expansive if you kind of followed every.
You're completely right.
Yeah.
It can be it has been a little bit hard to focus only on one thing. So I tend to tell myself I need to know exactly where I want this project to be and what I want it to say. So yeah.
Could I ask another question?
Yes.
Sure.
So you're out and about, and you either have somebody to lead you to people who occupy this space, or you pass them by, like you passed that gentleman in your travels. How do you approach somebody cold to introduce what you're doing and engage them in a way that is not as offensive as the woman in the cosmetic store approached you? What is your approach? What's your come on to get people to talk with you and spend time with you?
For me, when I go back in Kenya to photograph this, I to be honest, I don't tend to remove my camera as the first thing. I don't introduce that I am a photographer working on this project on albinism. I am mainly interested in how they live and how they, who they are. So I tend to mainly try and build a relationship, even if it's in a short amount of time, and get to know them. And it's a little bit easier in Kenya because I am Kenyan. And also I speak the language Swahili. So it's not that hard to go into that community. And with Felicia, because she also has her own organization called Persons with Albinism in Taita Taveta. So it becomes easier for me to, I have access in a way through her. So it's not a little bit hard, but I did struggle, like I said, and that's why I put it in my presentation when I went to Korea. And I really wanted to speak to this man, but I could not speak Korean. So this was one thing that I had to overcome. But at the same time, even if I stopped him, I kept bouncing back and forth. What would be the first thing that I say to him that would not make him uncomfortable and not want to slap me or run away? So I think for me, it's mainly building a relationship. So getting to know the person. And the easiest way I can explain to you is in Kenya, I tend to, as this might sound weird, but it's my custom and it's my tradition. We carry milk, bread, and juice. So juice, sorry. So these three things are things when you enter into someone's home, it's more like a tradition and a welcoming present. And it helps you build a relationship and a connection with someone because you've not entered in empty-handed. And this is a way to say that I'm here and I'm grateful that you've welcomed me into your home. But at the same time, I would also like to talk to you about this, and that. So yes, I don't know if that answers the question properly, but yeah.
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Cassandra. And Colleen put in the chat that it was a lovely presentation with many new things to think about.
Thank you.
So that's good, very thought-provoking. All right. Does anybody else have questions or comments too? You can always put comments in the chat. Our chat gets saved. So if you want to say something that's not necessarily a question, but a comment on the work, you can put it into the chat, and then I'll share that chat after the fact with Cynthia, so she'll be able to see the comments that you share.
I need to write the Dead Sea Scrolls.
And thanks for that, Frank, the Dead Sea Scrolls comment. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of, in addition to taking your photos, you're doing such a great deal of historical research too. I think that's really, I don't know, it's, and the incorporation of that, the text representing the stuff you're kind of unearthing from history, and the relationship between the history and the text and the images that you're making currently. I think that's a really interesting kind of relationship.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think it's been harder for me because people tend to think that mainly that because you come from Africa or you're Black, you have to do projects which are African and Black. But this is not the case. And I feel like for me, I'm pushing myself here a little bit because this is not a community that I am from. I am not a person with albinism. So I have to mention that every time I'm talking about this project. And that's why I use text a lot, because it helps me explain a little bit more what I lack. And this is, I cannot speak for someone who has albinism, but I feel like with their words and with their images, they can speak for themselves. So like I said before, where I've reached in my research right now is that I was in Kenya actually just last year, and in December, and I was to go again, as you know, Dale, in January, but because there was an issue with the government closing down their borders and everything. But I've been researching this project every time I try and go back home. And why I was going there the second time was mainly because I've come to realize that it's also a climate crisis issue. With the climate crisis issues, people with albinism are struggling a lot, and a lot of them are dying very young and easily because of the sun. The temperatures are really hot. I was in Tanzania and it is crazy hot. And it's really unbearable, and even for me, and I'm okay with the heat. With them I can imagine it's even worse. And in rural areas and in the villages, it's you have to work in order to be able to survive and to also support your families. And where are these works? They're in farms, they're outside, and it's not easy to work in these conditions for them because they don't have melanin to protect them from the UV rays. And so, yes, so mainly I was focusing on this idea that people with albinism, because I read something that it said that they don't live up to 40 years old. And while I was going back home, I was going to photograph an 82-year-old woman and a few men who was, I think he was 80, two men who were also in their 80s. And for me, it was really important I get there because this research is wrong. It's not true. It's yes, we read in order to understand, but sometimes even the research that is written here in the West is a little bit misinformed and ill-informed, I don't know. So you have to be back home in order for you to get the actual, to get the words from the people themselves. And so I'm looking forward to going back again, hopefully in March, in order to photograph these, to not just photograph, but to listen to their stories, because I think it's wrong to say that, because this was a warning. It was written in the UN. It was a UN article saying that people with albinism are dying very young, and they're not reaching above 40 years old. I think it's misguided. And so for me, this was something that was interesting to look at and to move forward with. Sorry, I've rumbled a lot, but yes. Yeah.
When you go and photograph these people, like as you meet new people or hear about new people who you go to photograph, are you, and you're learning their stories, are you recording their stories or writing them down? How are you kind of
Yes,
recording them?
I do record them, and mostly, like I said before, I tend not to take pictures of them because, as you know, with albinism, there's a lot of fetishization. I always struggle with that. Yes. So other than just colorism, Cassandra, there's also fetishization. So this idea that you not idea, but photographing people with albinism is beautiful. They are beautiful people. And it's a way, I don't know, it just has a little bit of a weird connection with fetish. And I don't want to put that in my project. So when I go to photograph them, their stories are important, but also I try to photograph them in a different way, like not just focusing mainly on how they look, but how they live, where they are, how they survive, I guess. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Frank put in the chat, it's great that you're presenting the reality, the people and their stories, contrasted with the seemingly limited documentation that exists. And then also, like you're mentioning, the statistics that are just incorrect or not reflective of reality.
Thank you, Frank. I'm trying my best.
I also think it's interesting the connection that you're making now between the albinism and the climate change, which, like, on the surface someone might not immediately understand the connection, but there is that connection. And I think that's another, like we were talking earlier with Cassandra's question, there are a lot of different kind of like ways you can go or different routes you can take with this work. And I wonder if you're gonna try to incorporate kind of that element of the story, the relation to climate.
I am, yes. Yeah. At the moment, I think it's the main thing to focus on right now for me.
All right. Does anybody have any questions? Last chance for questions. And again, don't forget, you can type stuff into the chat and I'll share the chat with Cynthia afterwards. All right. Giving people time to type. All right, if there aren't any other questions, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Cynthia. It was really, really a great presentation.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Dave.
Great.
Thank you, Dale. I really enjoyed it, really. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. It's helped me speak.
Well, it was our pleasure.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you again.